Hello and welcome to Arnie's Short Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. The Ghostly Lighthouse. The night had settled thick and cold over the Isle of Wight, sealing the land under a blanket of clouds and fog. Holly Arnold stood in the watchtower of an old lighthouse, gazing out over the churning waves that struck the cliffs below. The keeper's lantern cast an eerie light, a slim protection against the deep shadows creeping up from the sea. Holly had taken up the post only weeks prior, replacing the previous keeper, who had mysteriously vanished after 30 years on duty. Locals said he had lost his mind, driven mad by the endless isolation, the solitude that blanketed the island during winter's long nights. But Holly was not so easily frightened. Growing up in the Isle of Wight, she'd heard countless ghost tales woven into the history of the island. But they were stories for children, she had thought until tonight. As the storm gathered strength, Holly noticed an unsettling glow on the horizon. A shiver ran through her spine. She had been warned about these strange lights. The locals called them the souls of the drowned. But they were just ghost stories, weren't they? She couldn't look away as the glow intensified, flickering like embers floating on the waves approaching the lighthouse. Her heartbeat quickened. Was it a ship in distress? Holly grabbed the binoculars from the shelf, pressing them to her eyes, trying to make sense of the apparition. Through the lens, she could see the outline of a ship, old and worn, its sails shredded and torn as it drifted closer to the rocky shore. Yet something was wrong. The ship moved with a deliberate grace, too steady for a vessel caught in such a violent storm. Holly's blood turned to ice. She had heard tales of the Seafarer's Bride, a ghost ship that had been sighted by her predecessors but dismissed it as sailors' lore. Yet here it was gliding through the storm as if untouched by the winds. The ship's hull bore dark, ancient carvings, and lanterns dangled from its rigging, swinging in the breeze yet casting no light. Holly stepped back, her mind racing. Every instinct told her to abandon her post, yet duty called her back to the glass. As she adjusted her focus, a figure appeared on the ship's deck, a tall man in an oilskin coat, standing as still as stone. The man raised his head, and she saw him clearly for the first time. His skin was ashen, his eyes hollow, and he wore a look of profound sorrow. He lifted an arm, beckoning to her, and Holly's breath hitched. She staggered backward, her back hitting the cold stone of the tower wall. A deep, mournful sound filled the air, a ship's bell tolling over the water, ringing with an otherworldly echo that seemed to pierce through her chest. The storm intensified, and Holly felt a compulsion, an unearthly pull urging her to descend the spiral stairs and step outside. She tried to resist, her rational mind screaming against it, but her legs moved on their own, as if controlled by some ghostly force. The wind howled as she opened the door to the outside, the salt spray biting her cheeks. Down by the shoreline, the spectral ship loomed larger, as if it were coming alive with every step she took. Holly felt a presence behind her and turned, only to find a shadowy figure draped in a soaked wedding dress, her face veiled. The woman floated just inches above the ground, her form flickering as though caught between worlds. "Holly," the figure whispered. "You shouldn't have come here." The apparition reached a translucent hand toward her, and Holly gasped as icy fingers brushed her arm, filling her with a flood of memories not her own, visions of a wedding night shattered by a storm, a ship lost to the waves. Holly staggered back, clutching her chest, where her heartbeat thundered with dread. She understood now. The lighthouse wasn't just a beacon to warn sailors, it was a gateway, a place where lost souls lingered, doomed to return with each storm. Before she could react, a deafening clap of thunder sounded, and the ghostly bride let out a blood-curdling scream. Holly felt herself slipping, falling to her knees as the world around her twisted and darkened. She could see them now, figures walking out of the mist toward her. Sailors, all of them, their eyes vacant, their bodies broken from shipwrecks over the years, their souls trapped between this world and the next. The last thing Holly saw before the darkness claimed her was the captain's face, his hand reaching out to pull her into the shadowy depths. When dawn broke, the lighthouse was silent, standing against the pale morning light as if nothing had happened. Holly Arnold was never seen again, and to this day her name is whispered by the townsfolk of the Isle of Wight. They say if you stand on the cliff's edge during a storm, you can still see the ghostly lighthouse keeper, her lantern flickering in the mist, forever watching over the cursed waters where the souls of the drowned roam free. The tale of Holly Arnold's disappearance became another legend on the Isle of Wight, a new thread woven into the fabric of ghost stories that haunted the locals' memories. Fishermen would tell of hearing faint cries on stormy nights, and the children dared each other to visit the lighthouse when thunder rolled across the island. Some claimed to see a faint glow within the old tower's broken windows, a light that blinked once, then vanished into the mist. But the lighthouse's strange happenings didn't end with Holly's disappearance. One bitter autumn evening, an investigative team arrived from the mainland, eager to debunk the local ghost stories and uncover the truth behind Holly Arnold's fate. The lead investigator, Dr. Alina Reed, was a skeptic to the core and believed that tales of ghostly brides and haunted lighthouses were simply remnants of island folklore. She was determined to expose the truth, but the islanders eyed her warily, some warning her to leave well enough alone. Ignoring the warnings, Dr. Reed and her team set up camp near the lighthouse. They brought sophisticated equipment, cameras, voice recorders, electromagnetic detectors, all intended to capture whatever could be found within the tower. The stormy season had returned, and with it the uneasy feeling that Holly Arnold's story was far from over. The first night was uneventful. Rain lashed against the tower walls, and the team recorded little more than static and the sounds of wind battering the cliffs. But on the second night, a storm struck with a vengeance stronger than any Dr. Reed had seen before. Thunder rumbled like cannon fire, and the sky blazed with lightning, illuminating the waves crashing against the rocks below. At precisely midnight, as Dr. Reed reviewed footage inside the tower, the lighthouse beacon flickered on, bathing the room in a blinding, eerie light. Her assistant, Mark, glanced up, wide-eyed. "Isn't the power cut off in here?" he asked. Dr. Reed whispered, feeling an odd chill creep down her spine. The electricity was disconnected years ago. The two exchanged nervous glances before the beacon blinked off. A sudden, shrill noise filled the air, a piercing, echoing scream, as if someone were crying out from the depths of the sea. The team members froze, the sound sinking into their bones, chilling them from the inside out. Mark scrambled to check the equipment, but the cameras had all malfunctioned. Footage played back in glitching, broken fragments, showing only strange distortions of light and shadows. But then, in one frame, Dr. Reed spotted something that made her blood run cold. There, in the blurred footage, stood a figure at the edge of the screen, a woman in a silk wedding dress, her face hidden behind a veil, holding a lantern that glowed dimly against the storm. In another frame, she saw Holly Arnold, her form ghostly pale, standing beside the bride, her face frozen in a look of eternal sorrow. They seemed to be reaching out, as if calling for help, their mouths open in silent screams. Before Dr. Reed could process what she was seeing, the storm's roar grew louder, nearly drowning out all other sounds. The tower began to shake, as if it were trying to cast the intruders out to protect the island's secrets from prying eyes. One by one, the team members felt an overpowering urge to flee, driven by a force beyond their understanding. Dr. Reed shouted, grabbing Mark by the arm and pulling him toward the exit. The others followed, racing down the narrow stairwell, the walls vibrating as the wind howled through the cracks. As they burst out into the storm, they looked back and saw the figure of the bride, her veil fluttering in the wind, staring down at them from the top of the tower. They ran back to their van and left the lighthouse behind, the spectral figure watching as they disappeared into the night. Dr. Reed never spoke of what she had seen that night, but she knew that the island held secrets not meant for mortal eyes. She left the Isle of Wight with her team the next morning, shaken and silent. As they departed, an old fisherman at the docks warned her, "The lighthouse keeps its own, Doctor. Leave it be, or it'll come for you too." From that day on, the lighthouse remained empty, its beacon flashing only during the fiercest storms, casting its eerie light over the waves. And when the winds grew cold and the mist thickened, the locals claimed to see two figures in the tower, Holly Arnold and the ghostly bride, forever watching, forever waiting, their souls bound to the cursed waters of the Isle of Wight. To this day, the lighthouse stands as a silent sentinel, its haunted beams warning the living to steer clear. and those who dare venture too close on stormy nights may find themselves face to face with the ghostly bride and the keeper she claimed. Years passed, and the lighthouse in the Isle of Wight became a place of silent reverence, avoided by locals and whispered about by mainlanders. But every so often, an adventurer, ghost hunter, or thrill seeker would challenge the island's warnings, eager to glimpse the supernatural for themselves. One fog-drenched October, a small team of paranormal enthusiasts arrived on the island, eager to capture what others only whispered about. They had heard the tale of Holly Arnold and the ghostly bride and were determined to uncover the truth. Among them was a young woman named Anna, whose curiosity about Holly's story bordered on obsession. She had read every article, every witness statement, and pored over whatever fragments of Holly's life she could find, feeling strangely connected to the vanished keeper. With backpacks of recording devices and flashlights, the team made their way up the winding path to the lighthouse, its silhouette looming like a skeletal figure against the stormy sky. By the time they arrived, the wind had begun to howl, and dark clouds rolled over the horizon, threatening a tempest. Perfect timing, one of her teammates muttered, checking his equipment. The spirits supposedly show up when the weather gets rough. Anna couldn't help but feel a chill as they opened the creaking door and stepped into the tower. The interior was damp and cold, its walls peeling with age, the smell of salt and mildew heavy in the air. She turned on her flashlight, sweeping its beam across the empty room, her pulse quickening. They climbed the narrow stairs, their footsteps echoing in the dark, until they reached the top floor, where the lighthouse beacon was silent and dark, its glass dusty and clouded. Anna paused, feeling an almost tangible tension in the air, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. They set up their equipment, and the team leader, Daniel, began to speak into a recorder. "We're here at the Isle of Wight lighthouse, where the keeper, Holly Arnold, disappeared some years ago under mysterious circumstances. Locals claim her ghost, along with a spectral bride, still haunts this place." As Daniel spoke, Anna felt an odd sensation of prickling along her arms, a shiver down her spine. She turned toward the beacon, catching a flicker of movement out of the corner of her eye. Just a trick of the light, she told herself. But then she saw it again, a shadow drifting across the dusty glass, as if someone were circling them, watching. "Did anyone else see that?" she whispered. But her voice was drowned out as a loud creaking sound echoed from the stairwell below. The team exchanged nervous glances. No one else was supposed to be there, and the door had been locked behind him. Daniel called, his voice wavering slightly. Silence answered him. They held their breath, listening, and then footsteps. Slow, deliberate, climbing the stairs, echoing up through the hollow tower. Anna felt a surge of dread, but her curiosity overpowered her fear. She turned on her flashlight and moved toward the stairwell, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever or whoever was approaching. As she peered down, her light caught the faint outline of a figure halfway up the stairs. It was a woman, dressed in a sodden, white gown, her veil clinging to her face in damp tendrils. Anna's heart pounded as the woman lifted her head, her eyes hollow, staring through the veil with a sorrowful gaze. Holly," the woman whispered. "But where are you?" "Holly," Anna stumbled back. "But did you all hear that?" Her teammates stared at her, pale and wide-eyed. But before they could react, the lighthouse beacon flickered to life, casting sickly greenish light over the room, illuminating the shadowy figure with an unnatural glow. Then came another sound, someone calling from outside, a voice muffled by the howling wind but unmistakably real. "Help me," it cried. The team rushed to the windows, straining to see through the rain-streaked glass. Down below, standing near the edge of the cliff, was another figure, a woman with tangled, wet hair, her clothes torn and clinging to her thin frame. She was waving her arms frantically, her voice hoarse as she cried out, "Please, help! Is that Holly?" Anna whispered, staring down in horror. She had read that the townsfolk claimed to hear her voice during storms, but seeing her here, so vivid, felt all too real. "Come on." Anna bolted down the stairs, barely hearing her teammates' calls to stop. She flew out of the tower into the howling wind and rain, the ground slick beneath her feet as she stumbled toward the figure on the cliff's edge. The woman looked up, and as Anna approached, she saw her face more clearly, the unmistakable features of Holly Arnold, her eyes wide with fear and desperation. Anna's voice shook. "Is it really you?" The woman's mouth opened. Instead, her hand reached toward Anna, her face etched with a profound sadness that seemed to carry the weight of lifetimes. Then, as Anna's fingers brushed Holly's, a surge of icy coldness shot through her, and her vision blurred. Memories that were not her own flooded her mind, visions of endless, stormy nights, the shadow of the bride looming, ghostly apparitions, and the relentless, consuming pull of the sea. Holly's last moments flashed before her, filled with terror and confusion, her spirit trapped within the lighthouse, bound to its cursed beacon. With a gasp, Anna stumbled back, clutching her chest. Holly's figure flickered like a dying flame before vanishing into the mist, leaving only the wail of the wind and the toll of an unseen bell echoing through the storm. Her teammates found her moments later, staring out over the cliff's edge, her face pale, her eyes wide and haunted. They led her back to the van, and as they drove away, Anna remained silent, the ghostly memories etched into her mind. In the years that followed, Anna would find herself drawn back to the Isle of Wight, unable to shake the feeling that Holly's spirit was still out there, waiting, calling out for release. And sometimes, on stormy nights, she could swear she heard that faint voice echoing across the sea. "If Holly," it whispered, the name drifting like a haunting lullaby over the crashing waves. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had or have a great day.